Hey y'all, what is up? Keasbey here. So today we're going to be mixing it up and talking about an old favorite deck of mine with a bit of a twist. We're going to be looking at a budget version of Guru Control. So when I say budget, I tried to make sure that no individual card in this deck, with one exception that I will call out, is more than $5, and most are under $1 to themselves. I'll talk a bit throughout as well about optimizations you can make to this deck as well if you really enjoy playing it. But before we get into that, don't forget to drop this video a like, subscribe to the channel for even more, and if you want to help us out that little bit extra, check out the link in the description to pick yourself up a playmat. So, a bit about Guru Control before we dive into the deck. This is a slow, grindy deck that wants to force a simplified game state in which you can, through Subterra, Guru, and Fiendus, outgrind and outresource your opponent. Full disclosure, while I think this deck is still viable as a rogue option, it has been power crept a bit, and this deck requires a fairly extensive knowledge of other matchups to perform, unless you draw incredibly well and win the die roll every single time. So let's dive right in. First off, we've got triple copies of the boy himself, Subterra Guru. So Guru is what makes the deck tick. On a flip effect, he can add any Subterra card from your deck to your hand, except for himself. Simple enough. Guru's second effect is that he can target one other monster on the field and flip both himself and that monster face down. Bonus, if you control another face-up Subterra card, this becomes a quick effect. We'll talk a bit more about that later on, as it has some cool interactions with some of our spell and trap lineup. The other thing to mention regarding this effect, if Guru leaves the field or is flipped face down prior to the resolution of this effect, it will resolve without effect, as both he and his target have to be flipped face down at the same time to resolve properly. Both of his effects are hard once per turns as well. He is your priority search for this deck. Next up, we've got triple copies of our Omni-Negate hand trap, Subterra Fiendus. Subterra Fiendus has two effects. First of which is when your opponent activates a card or effect, you can send her to the graveyard and target a Subterra monster you control. Then negate the activation of that card or effect, then flip the targeted monster face down. Really good. But let's talk about why it's even cooler than you might think. First, do keep in mind there are pros and cons to negating the activation versus just negating an effect, and this negation doesn't include a destruction clause. These are all important distinctions for a lot of reasons, one of which is coming up later in this profile. The next thing to mention is that she only has to target a Subterra monster to be able to negate. For example, if your opponent activates a spell Chainlink 1, you go Chainlink 2 Fiendus targeting Guru, and they go Chainlink 3 with something that would destroy Guru. Fiendus will still resolve properly because her activation requirement of targeting a Subterra was met. The flip is the last part of her effect to resolve and is actually contingent on the negation of the card she's attempting to negate, not the other way around. Another example that is very relevant for this deck, if your opponent goes Chainlink 1, any activation, you go Chainlink 2 Fiendus targeting Guru, you can go Chainlink 3 Guru, provided you met the requirements for him to be a quick effect, to flip himself and something else face down. Then Fiendus will still resolve because, again, she just needed to target the face-up Guru, negating our opponent's Chainlink 1. Now that we've gone on at length about Fiendus' first effect, let's talk about her second effect. You can target one face-up monster you control, this can be anything, including herself, and flip it face down, and if you do, special summon one Subterra monster from your hand or graveyard to the field in either face-up or face-down defense position. So a few notes on this effect now. First, this one she does have to successfully flip her target face down to resolve. It's also important to note that this effect does target whatever is going to flip. The second note is that what is being summoned, however, is not targeted and is chosen on resolution. Spoiler for later, we play There Can Be Only One, and this interacts interesting with this. A power play for grinding with Guru is that Fiendus' first effect also works from field, so you can summon a Fiendus from grave with Fiendus to keep a loop of negations live. The relevance with There Can Be Only One is that if you control a face-up Fiendus, you can actually special summon another Fiendus. You will still only be able to have one Fiendus face up at the time, So the second Fiendus will have to summon face down, or it can be face up if you flipped the initial Fiendus face down to activate her own effect, since it's flip then summon. But the long and short of it is, you can loop Fiendus with this, even under there can be only one. Both of her effects are also hard once per turns. She is generally going to be your second search. Next up for our Subterra lineup, we've got one copy of Subterra Nemesis Archer. Archer is really cool. She has the effect that if you have another face-up Subterra monster, she specifically needs a monster, not just a card like Guru's effect. When she attacks at the start of the damage step, she can spin back whatever she's attacking into the deck. Her second effect, if she's destroyed by battle or card effect and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon any Subterra monster from your deck to either face up or face down defense position. Both of her effects are hard once per turns. She is pretty solid if you miss Guru on the opening, but have other back row to back her up. Following her, we've got one copy of Subterra Behemoth Umastrix. Okay, so one note about this, first and foremost, it is breaking our budget rule for the deck, but it's the only time we will do that. At the time of recording this, Umastrix is a $7 card. Now, you don't need Umastrix for this deck, but I do highly recommend running one. It's a level 7 with 2000 attack and 2700 defense. Its first effect is, if a monster is flipped face down and all of your monsters are now face down, you can special summon Umastrix from your hand in face up defense position. So this effect can miss timing, and there's a very big example of another Subterra card that causes it to miss timing that seems counterintuitive, but we will get to that later. What doesn't cause it to miss timing is Fiendus' negation, provided the negated card or effect is Chain Link 1. So a quick explanation for this and why it won't miss timing. If your opponent activates a card or effect Chain Link 1, you activate Fiendus Chain Link 2. You activate the Fiendus only by targeting the Subterra that will be flipping face down and sending her to the graveyard. Now, Chain begins resolving. Fiendus' effect resolves, negating the card or effect first, then flipping the targeted Subterra face down. Now, because Fiendus' effect negates activation, it's as though Chain Link 1 doesn't exist for the case of this example, meaning that the last thing to happen and resolve is Fiendus flipping its target face down. Therefore, Umastrix doesn't miss timing here. Now that we've got Umastrix summon effect covered, its more basic effect is that it can flip itself face down, then on flip effect, target and banish one monster your opponent controls. So I like having a copy of Umastrix in a basic Guru control deck that isn't running Dragoon or Destroyer Phoenix Enforcer, as it acts as a good form of removal, and it's a large body as well, getting massive with one of our traps that we'll cover later on. If you do want to hard stick to the budget rule of this deck, I would suggest a second Nemesis Archer or an additional hand trap if you do want to replace the Umastrix. That's it for the Subterras. Let's talk about hand traps. So this, if you really want to build on this list, is where you'll be making the most upgrades. First off, for our hand traps, we've got 3 copies of Effect Veiler. Effect negation is great, not a ton more to really say about him. I would recommend replacing these with Infinite Impermanence if you have access to them already. I prefer Imperm over Veiler given the choice, as Imperm cannot be called by, doesn't proc triple tack, and the column negate is pretty great when you can pull it off. Next up is kind of a weird feeling inclusion, but I ran it in my old Guru control build and it was very, very good at helping take games, and that is triple copies of Cyframe Gear Gamma. So this deck struggles going second into an established board. Fiendus isn't live turn 0, and if our opponent has negations, a lot of our floodgate traps can get shut off. Gamma can be an incredible tool for going second, given that it not only negates, but it totally removes the body from the field as well. So for example, stopping Punk, they now not only don't get that first search, but they need 2 extenders to get into a Halka-Fibrax or other plays. Against Flandreese, it stops any bird and removes it as tribute material. And same with Sword Soul, plus with the added bonus that Gamma can stop the level 6 that activates in hand, whereas Valor cannot. Sorry, I'm forgetting the name of that other card. Now going first, Gamma will punish a badly timed Ash Blossom from your opponent in a really big way. Not only will it force through your Hidden City or Pot of Extravagance through the Ash Blossom, but it also now gives you material for either a Link 2 or a level 8 Synchro depending on the game state, which can be another huge swing for you, but we'll cover that later on. Gamma can also act as a comeback card later in the game if you're playing a bit of a Protect the Castle style game with Guru and it gets cleared. You now have Gamma to fall back on. It can also be a dead draw later in the game, but if all is going the way it should and you're at a point where later in the game is the current game, you will be getting so much searching done with Guru that drawing into the dead card doesn't outweigh the benefits that Gamma provides. I know a lot of people aren't a huge fan of Gamma and Guru, but give it a chance. If you really don't like it, you can replace this and the 1 Garnet it needs with any other hand traps that you currently have access to. And of course, speaking of that Garnet, we have our 1 Cyframe gear driver. The only thing I have to say about driver is try your best to get it in the graveyard after resolving Gamma if you can, and don't forget that in weird corner cases, you can tribute summon this for damage. Don't laugh, it has come up more than once. So that's it for our monster lineup. Again, if you want to play around with improving this deck, you could look at Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring as a very good generic hand trap. And I also like Dimension Shifter in this deck, despite the fact that it does conflict with Fiendus. If you are using it turn 0, you probably won't be needing the Fiendus until the Dimension Shifter is offline, so it is very good in that specific instance. Alright, let's talk about our spells and traps. First off, we've got 3 copies of our incredible field spell, the Hidden City. So, the Hidden City does a lot. First, when you activate it, you can add any 1 Subterra monster from your deck to your hand. I'm going to mention it here, the actual activation of the Hidden City itself is a hard once per turn. Next, on a soft once per turn, you can flip 1 face-down Subterra monster you control face-up. I mentioned this is a soft once per turn as there will be instances where you'll have a Hidden City and 2 face-down Subterrors. You can use the on-field Hidden City to flip 1 up, then activate a new Hidden City and still have that new Hidden City's flip effect as well. Then, on another soft once per turn, when your opponent's monster declares an attack, you can change 1 face-down Subterror to face-up attack or defense. Then, if you choose to, you can negate the attack. So, a lot to say about these effects. First and foremost, neither of these effects target. You choose what to flip on resolution. So, for example, for the first effect of just flipping, if your opponent destroys one of your face-down Subterrors, you can still flip another one face-up since the flip is chosen on resolution. Next, for the attack negate flip, there will be times where what you have face-down changes between the activation of Hidden City's effect and the resolution. For example, if you have 1 face-down Subterror and 2 face-ups, you can activate Hidden City. Then, if your opponent destroys one of your face-down Subterrors in the same chain, if you can get another Subterror face-down by the time Hidden City's effect is resolving, you can still negate the attack as long as another Subterror is face-down at the time of resolution. Something also to note here is you don't have to negate the attack, so this can act as a way to get a defense position Subterror to attack position to overpower an attack, with the aid of a card we'll get into in a bit. Next, again, this is a soft once per turn, so if you happen to get a new Hidden City on the field between attacks, you'll have another attack negation provided you have another Subterror to flip. And the very last thing that is very relevant, the effects to flip monsters face up do not count as summons. That means that your opponent, for example, can't chain Torrential Tribute to them or Solemn Judgment a Guru flipped with City or Solemn Warning Hidden City's effect to flip. This also means that these flips do not count towards summon limit either, hint hint. All in all, this card really does wonders for this deck. Next up, we have access to our 3 field spells in the form of terraforming. Following that, we've got the start of our consistency engine with 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance. So a few things here. It's actually debatable what is better, Extravagance or Pot of Prosperity for this deck. I personally prefer Prosperity, but it's not a case of one being objectively better than the other. Extravagance is being used here for budgeting reasons, but don't feel like you need Prosperity to add a ton more to this deck over Extravagance. The main difference comes to the extra deck composition. You don't use your extra deck often, and most games you probably won't use it at all, but when you resolve a Gamma turn 1, you do have some cool options you can guarantee will be available if you play Prosperity, whereas you might banish them by accident off Extravagance. Also, the fact that Pot of Prosperity can be used at any point in the turn, not just at the beginning of main phase 1 like Extravagance, is a bit of an advantage towards it. However, Extravagance is essentially Pot of Greed for this deck, and Pot of Greed is always good. So really, this one comes down to what does your budget look like and what is your preference, but to say it again, I really don't think one of them is objectively better than the other. Next, we have 2 copies of Pot of Duality. So because this deck is pretty consistent in its own right, we only really need 2 of these here. I find that 3 is too many, especially since once the engine gets started, we'd rather see more higher impact cards and our searches will thin the deck out plenty. Keep in mind, for this build specifically, this does conflict with Gamma since we can't special summon the turn we activate Duality, so even if Duality gets hit with an Ash Blossom, we are still locked out of special summons. After that, we have a cool include in Subterra Cave Clash. So, Cave Clash does a few things. First, it boosts all Subterra monsters' attack and defense by 500 for every face-down monster on the field. That's both sides of the field, by the way. Do keep in mind, if you have a face-up Guru and your opponent has 1 face-down monster with 2000 defense, your Guru will have 2100 attack until damage calculation when the monster he's attacking flips face up, dropping Guru back down to 1600, causing the attack to not destroy the intended monster. Secondly, when a Subterra monster deals battle damage to your opponent, you can take 1 Subterra card, including spells and traps, and add it back to your hand. It's pretty cool for keeping Fiendus in rotation if you have a turn where you can't use Fiendus to recur another Fiendus from grave. And last, and potentially most important, the effect that isn't actually written on the card, but is a result of this card being a Subterra card that stays face up on the field, is that this turns Guru's Book of Moon effect into a quick effect at all times. I've seen lists not playing this, but I think it adds a lot to the deck, especially that unwritten part. An additional piece of support to help resolving our adds and our searches, we've got 1 copy of Called by the Grave, just a generally good card overall. Now we have a fun little set rotation package consisting of Set Rotation, Mystic Mine, and Necro Valley. Yeah, Mystic Mine, I know, but sometimes this deck needs it. Guru can actually play very well under Mystic Mine, forcing a situation where you can use Guru to continuously keep one of your opponent's monsters face down, making it very difficult for your opponent to get down to 1 monster on the field to break out of the mine. Additionally, we can just stall until we have enough interruptions to just totally break our opponent's board and stop them from making a new one. Next, here we have Necro Valley. So I've been playing Necro Valley in Guru for years and it wins games by itself. For those who don't know, to put it simply, it basically says don't touch the graveyard. Negate anything that would move a card out of the graveyard, negate anything that changes a monster type or attribute in the graveyard on its current errata. It's been errataed, I think, like 10 times or something at this point. Generally, if you need to use Set Rotation to start your plays, you're giving this to your opponent and taking Hidden City for yourself, but something to keep in mind, once you have a little bit of setup, Guru can play very well without having Hidden City on field. So, 2 major notes about Set Rotation specifically. If one of the cards set with it remains on the field, neither player can activate a new field spell over what they have. An example of what I'm talking about here is, let's say we set rotation, giving our opponent Necro Valley and we get Mystic Mine. We then proceed to leave that Mystic Mine set. Our opponent activates their Necro Valley. They now cannot activate another field spell as long as the Mystic Mine we took with set rotation remains set on the field. It is also an out to your opponent's Mystic Mine, as you can just replace it with another set field spell, then just sit on the field spell you set, preventing your opponent from activating a new field spell on their own side of the field. Overall, set rotation is a very strong card with a lot of creative uses. One last additional thing about Necro Valley before we move on. It does conflict with Fiendus' effect to special summon from the graveyard and Cape Clash's effect to add from graveyard back to hand. But we do have a trap card coming down the line that actually allows us to bypass Necro Valley's restriction on its current errata. Who knows if they've changed that now, depending on when you are watching this. Alright, now for the traps. First off, we're on triple copies of Solemn Strike. So I prefer Solemn Strike over Solemn Judgment in the main deck, because Judgment really loses a lot of its utility if you lose the die roll and have to go second. Given that at that point, our opponent has probably already set up, we're really just using Solemn Judgment from there to try to survive. And that's assuming that at that point, our opponent even has to play into Solemn Judgment. Solemn Strike, however, has good utility going first and second. Given that most interactions are from monsters, we can use Strike to insulate our effects in a way that our opponent will have much more difficulty responding to, since a monster quick effect is spell speed 2 and a counter trap is spell speed 3. We also have our 3 Fienduses that can act as spell trap negates if we need to stop a higher impact back row that our opponent is playing. We do, spoilers for later, have a Judgment mained and 2 more in the side deck as well for when we know we are going first. As mentioned before, we have 1 copy of Solemn Judgment. In an ideal build where we weren't with a budget restriction, I would probably side this for an additional hand trap, but it's not bad to have it one in here either for when we do win the die roll. Next up, we have the start of our Floodgate suite with 2 copies of There Can Be Only One. Not a lot to say about this generically, but a few comments about it specifically in this deck. First off, we're running 2 of them because we have another 2 Floodgates coming up. I used to only run 3 of these and no other Floodgates, but there are decks that can out a There Can Be Only One pretty easily now without playing into There Can Be Only One, so we need a variety now. First note, we can actually summon Fiendus with Fiendus under There Can Be Only One, provided that one of them ends up face down. This is because the cost to special summon with Fiendus is targeting and flipping face down. So we can flip our Fiendus, then at resolution, when we actually choose what to summon, we can choose to summon the Fiendus. Or the reverse. We can target something else, leaving the initial Fiendus face up, and because choosing face up or face down happens simultaneously with choosing what we will summon, we can summon the Fiendus face down because our summon target, in air quotes because this only actually works because Fiendus doesn't target, comes in face down and the game state doesn't know her typing. Next, the effect to flip face down Subterra monsters face up via Hidden City and another card we'll cover in a bit, can actually flip a same type monster under There Can Be Only One, because it's an effect to flip an undefined monster, not a summon. A flipped Guru under There Can Be Only One will not get its effect though, because it is immediately sent to graveyard if you already have another dragon face up. So really the only utility this offers is if you need to emergency negate an attack with Hidden City and only have 1 face up and 1 face down Guru available. Lastly, you can activate Cyframe Gear Gamma under There Can Be Only One, and There Can Be Only One actually helps with Gamma. This is because the summon of Gamma and Driver is simultaneous. You will immediately on resolution though have to send one of them to the graveyard, which will always be Driver, meaning that your other Gammas in the deck are still live because Gamma can summon Driver from the graveyard. Something worth noting here as well, if that Gamma gets cleared, Gamma is not once per turn. Following that, we have a simpler floodgate in Summon Limit. A few notes again though, Summon Limit does count summons that occurred before it was activated. So if your opponent summons twice and you flip Summon Limit, it does count their previous 2 summons and they can no longer summon for the turn. Next, as mentioned before, but absolutely worth re-mentioning here, the effects that flip Subterras face up do not count as summons and therefore do not count towards Summon Limit's, well, limit. After that, we have 1 copy of Metaverse. So it's very important to note that if you Metaverse activate Hidden City, you will not get the search because City will actually miss timing due to its search being a when this card is activated, but its activation happens as Metaverse is resolving. However, you can Metaverse a Hidden City over a Hidden City during the battle phase if you need a second attack negate. The better uses, however, are Metaversing Mystic Mine. Basic, I know, but if you really want to be fancy, Metaverse into Necro Valley to negate anything trying to interact with the graveyard. This actually does work in response to Called by the Grave if your opponent attempts to Called by the Grave your Fiendus. Overall, it's really good to have, and you can also always add the Hidden City to your hand if you need to and can stall out for a turn. Lastly, we have the coolest trap in the deck, Subterra Final Battle. So this is the mysterious trap card I've been referencing throughout the video. It has 4 modular effects. First, you can flip a face-down Subterra monster face-up in either attack or defense position. Just a note, if you do this on attack declaration, it does not cause a redeclare. This doesn't come up often, but it's good to be aware of. Next is the inverse of that, flip a face-up Subterra face-down. Same note as before, this will not cause a redeclare. Next effect, you can combine the attack and defense of a Subterra monster, and that monster's attack and defense becomes that combined value. A very big note about this specific effect is that it can be used in the damage step. So a few things about these effects overall. First, they do not target. You can get into some fun flipping situations with multiple copies of this card and multiple Subterras where you can flip and unflip one monster during the same chain. Also, the attack boost effect does not target either. This doesn't come up as often because there isn't a lot of counterplay in the damage step, but it's good to know. These also affect your opponent's Subterra monsters in the mirror match or if your Subterra is taken onto your opponent's side of the field, hilariously. The last effect prevents the effects of your Subterra cards from being negated for the turn. Okay, a lot to say about this one. First and foremost, this prevents effect negation, not activation negation. An example of this is if your opponent uses Ash Blossom or Imperm on your Guru, you can chain this to force the effect through because both of those interactions negate an effect, not an activation. If your opponent uses something like Barone, which negates the activation itself, then unfortunately you are out of luck. Next, this is the card that allows us to supersede the restrictions of Necro Valley. Because the current errata of Necro Valley specifically is a continuous negation of effects, Final Battle can bypass that, allowing Cave Clash and Fiendus to recover from Graveyard. This also opens up the possibility of playing Skill Drain in the side deck as well, since you can keep your activations online, but I'm personally not a huge fan of that because it hinges on having Final Battle live at all times. Now, the craziest part about this card, it's not once per turn in any way, and it resets itself on resolution. You can't use the same copy of it twice in one turn because it will have just been set that turn, but it will stick around on the field until it's destroyed. The other thing to note is that the resetting will cause Umastrix to miss timing, even if this is Chain Link 1 if you are using it to flip your monster face down. This occurs because the last thing that will have happened in the chain resolving is Final Battle resetting itself, not the monster flipping face down. The last thing to mention about Subterra Final Battle is how it interacts with Subterra Guru specifically. Subterra Guru, as previously mentioned, becomes a quick effect if you control another face-up Subterra card. Once you have flipped Subterra Final Battle face-up, for the duration of that chain, because cards stay face-up on the field until the chain has finished resolving, Subterra Guru is now a quick effect. So an example of this is if your opponent normal summons a monster and you know that they want to go into a Link 1, you can, on summon of the monster, activate Subterra Final Battle as Chainlink 1 using any of the effects, and then on Chainlink 2, Guru is now a quick effect. You can activate him to flip both himself and the summoned monster face down. So that's it for the main deck. Let's talk about the extra deck. So again, you won't be using this very often, if at all, but always be aware of what's here. The other thing to mention is that while Gamma is your easy access to the extra deck, Extravagance does make it so that you don't always have consistent access to any one specific line of play, so we have built accordingly. First off, we have a small Dogmatica Maximus package of Elder Entity Entis, Cyber Dragon Nova, and Invoked Mechaba. So in the original script for this deck profile, I mentioned that this hasn't ever actually come up, but I leave them in because there is room. However, as of this morning, it has now come up twice in a row where I was able to send the Cyber Dragon Nova off my opponent's Maximus and go into my turn 1 with an Invoked Mechaba. If you want to put a date on when I was playing Guru Control competitively, it was not overly uncommon to get to send 2 Cyber Dragon Novas off of my opponent's Maximuses, get a double Mechaba board, and then on my own turn I could overlay those into a VFD. Following that, we have our Waking the Dragon package of Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon, Naturia Exterio, and Last Warrior from Another Planet. Pretty basic here, but something to mention about Last Warrior is that while neither player can summon under his effect, nothing is stopping you from setting and then flipping face up via card effect. Just pointing that out. Next up, we have the suite of monsters you will actually summon off of a Gamma activation. First is 2 copies of Draco Berserker of the Tenyi. So this card is crazy. It is a walking ghost ogre for monsters. If you don't know, when your opponent's monster activates an effect, you can banish that monster. Granted, this doesn't negate, but it is a non-targeting removal, and that can be huge. If you have this on the field as well, that means you most likely have a Guru live, which is crazy to have both of these on field at the same time. Also, he's big and gets bigger. When he destroys an effect monster, he gains that monster's original attack forever. Then he can attack a second time on another monster only. Great option to make off of Gamma. Another fun option to make off of Gamma in games 2 and 3 is Stardust Dragon, which we also play 2 of. The only issue with Stardust Dragon is that it does conflict with there can be only one in Guru, but you can mitigate that by cycling which one of them is face up and face down on the field, which is fairly easy to do once you're comfortable with the deck. Following that, we have 2 copies of Cyframe Lord Lambda. You'll generally go into this if you have a second Gamma in hand, as he lets you keep Gamma live while you continue your plays by allowing you to use Gamma while you have monsters on the field. Keep in mind, this absolutely will conflict with There Can Be Only One, as you won't be able to use Gamma with him on field due to typing restrictions. Next up, we have 1 lone copy of Cyframe Lord Omega. Just a general good card if your other options have been banished. And to close out our extra deck, we have 2 copies of Nightmare Phoenix. This could also be 1 copy of Nightmare Phoenix and 1 copy of Nightmare Unicorn if you prefer that. I just personally like having 2 copies of Nightmare Phoenix because it is a good utility card and there's always the chance that you will lose one of them off of Extravagance. So that was the extra deck. Now let's talk about the side deck. So the first thing I want to mention is that this is very much up for modulation depending on how you want to play it, and same for the extra deck as well, in all honesty. I'm personally not playing Super Polymerization because I'm both on Extrav and Gamma, so I need the room for Gamma summons, which I think are remarkably impactful when you can get them. But if you played Prosperity and no Gamma, you'd have space to jam a variety of Super Poly targets in this deck. But I also don't think Super Poly is that great in Guru at the moment, because there is a pretty big, diverse metagame right now, and you aren't natively making fusion monsters anyway, so you're really going to be entirely beholden to what your opponent has available to use, and there are decks that just don't really provide any usable Super Poly monsters for you. So first off, for our side deck, we've got 1 copy of Harpy's Feather Duster. Not a whole lot to say about this, just a very good card to have access to. Next up, we've got triple copies of Twin Twister. Again, this is really just covering our bases and making sure that we have back row removal tools for games that we know we will be going second and that are not in the form of monster effects for Mystic Mine. After that, we've got 2 copies of Waking the Dragon. Good to side in if you know you're going first, and we have a pretty nice lineup of monsters to go into depending on the matchup. Something else worth noting about Waking the Dragon, on the off chance all of your good targets have been banished off of Extravagance or your entire extra deck has been banished off of Extravagance, it's happened before. Waking the Dragon can also special summon from the deck if you need to emergency spam a Numostrix onto the field as well. Another very good trap card we have in our side deck, we've got 2 copies of Dimensional Barrier. Sword Soul's really good, Despia's really good, Drytron is really good, extra deck summoning is just really good, so let's run a trap that just shuts all of that down and gives us a nice free turn. Following that up, we have copies 3, 4, and 5 of all of those traps, 3 copies of Trap Trick. So 2 cool notes about Trap Trick. In a pinch, you can Trap Trick for Subterra Final Battle since it's a normal trap. This isn't ideal as you're forcing yourself to only have one available, but it's good to know if you ever need to do it. The next cool interaction is if you have Trap Trick set and your opponent uses Feather Duster or Lightning Storm, anything that will wipe out all of your back row, you can chain Trap Trick, setting Waking the Dragon, and then Waking the Dragon will get destroyed by your opponent's card at the time it resolves, letting you activate Waking the Dragon. Something else to note is if you do replace the effect failures in the main deck with Infinite Impermanence, Trap Trick does work with that too. After that, we have a 3rd copy for both of our major floodgates. Some matches there can be only one isn't great, sometimes it's all you need and you'd be better served with other cards over the 4th floodgate in the deck, so it's good to have a 3rd copy of both of these for when you need that modularity. And lastly, we have 2 copies of Solemn Judgment to side in for any games that we know we are going first or that are going to be slow, grindy games as well. So that is the budget Guru control deck. Again, I did my best to keep it very low cost for anyone who wants to try it out in paper with very little commitment, but still have a lot of room to build out the deck if you enjoy playing it. Guru Control is a lot of fun, and it's much more than Floodgate Pass, though admittedly it can be Floodgate Pass. As with any rogue deck, you'll be rewarded for knowing the specifics of any matchup, and I think Guru is especially good with the tools it has at really picking out choke points in combos and shutting them down. We'll have some gameplay videos for this soon showing it off, and I'm really excited to be talking about one of my favorite decks of all time again. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to drop it a like, subscribe to the channel for even more, and I will catch you all later.